Hey guys, my guest tonight, Lyle Blackburn, and I are going to be talking about the Bishopville monster. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing? I hope you said fine, because we've got a great show lined up today. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you think you might have a paranormal issue, we can get you adjusted here. It might take us a while because California is a big state. In fact, when many people think about California, let me get this. I moved all this stuff the other day. When people think about California, they think about kind of like Hawaii. First thing that comes to mind is beaches, right? Out on the beaches. Well, there are a lot of beaches up and down the West Coast. I'm kind of in the middle of the state. But there's also a lot of farmland. There's also a lot of mountains, and there's high desert and normal desert that California is made up of, and it's huge. It's bigger than a lot of people think it is. So, that being the case, even though we have people, 45 people up and down the state, it still may take us a day or two to get out to help you. But we will help you. And before we get out there, we have psychics and mediums on staff who can call you and talk to you about what may or may not be going on in your place of business or home. And in most cases, they can settle down the energy until we get there. And I can guarantee you it'll only take us no more than 3 days to get out to you, to help you out. So, so look us up on Facebook, look us up on Twitter, look us up on Twitch, look us up on TikTok, look us up on Instagram. Because on Instagram, it's Ghosty Gal, all lowercase. On Facebook, it's my name and California Haunts. On Twitter, it's California Haunts. On Twitch, it's Cal Haunts. And over at TikTok is California Haunts. So you can find me over there as well. And then we can take it from there. Anyway, I want to welcome everybody. If you're watching from Facebook tonight and you see and like what you hear, do me a favor and hit that follow button if you haven't done so already. We're trying to build up our followers and our audience and stuff, and I really appreciate it. Also, if you do like what you hear and you want to spread the word for me, share it. There might be someone else sitting there in your house that maybe, doesn't know about the show, and has a good chance to say, hey, there's a really cool little show over here. Come on over and watch it. So, yeah, please do share. Please do share. Also, what I ask for Facebook, too, is the thumbs up, happy faces, smileys, and all that good stuff. And comments. Always comment. Because what that does is it puts us up in the algorithm, the FYP, and it helps Facebook. It makes Facebook take notice, and then they distribute us further out. Same thing with YouTube. If you like what you see and hear, share us. If you have friends that might be interested in all this, before it falls down, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already. We have over 700 videos over on YouTube, all of this show, all different topics. So all you have to do is go over there and take a look. Now, what I've done, because it's overwhelming with the 700, I can guarantee you that it gives me a headache, is I've started to categorize them into folders. So if you're into cryptids, there's a cryptid folder, which is where this show's going to end up in about a week. And I'll archive everything in about a week after I do them. And we've got a UFO folder. Nancy Matz has her own folder for her shows and things like that. That way, when you go in, you can just go to whatever topic you need to look the stuff up. Because otherwise, I'm telling you, I've done it myself. It's mind-boggling with that many videos sitting over there. Okay, it's really mind-boggling. So I did that to help you guys out a little bit. And again, give us, show us some love. Comment, give us some thumbs up, give us happy faces, hearts, whatever. Because that, again, YouTube works the same way like Facebook does with that algorithm. The more we get, the more it'll push it out to others, and that's what we're looking for. I always say at the end of the show that if you like the show, share it with 5 people, and if you hated the show, share it with 5 people anyway. That's the rule. That's the going rate. We want you to share if we want to get the word out. Okay, that being said, my guest tonight has been on before. The last time he came on, he talked about a topic. I grew up listening to stories about the Boggy creature, saw the movie and stuff. So we talked about that. But this time, he's got a whole other story to tell. Lyle Blackburn. And we're going to be talking about the Bishopville monster. It's just maybe a lizard man. So he's going to be telling us about that and his experiences, kind of investigating and looking into that. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Lyle in, and we can get started. How's that sound, guys? Here we go. Welcome back.
thanks for having me. Good to see you.
I'm excited to see you again.
Right on.
For everybody who doesn't know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, sir?
Well, my name is Lyle Blackburn. I live in Texas. I was born and raised here. I've had a lifelong interest in strange and unexplained phenomenon, as I'm sure most people who listen can identify with that. Started out with ghosts, UFOs, and always loved cryptids. When I was young, I went hunting with my father. So tales of possible unknown creatures in the woods really appealed to me. And then, as we talked about last time, I saw the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek back in the 70s when I was really young. And that really just got me on the track of that. And years later, I really kind of as an adult started looking into these topics and cases more seriously with more adult investigative skills, I guess. And that resulted in my first book called The Beast of Boggy Creek, which came out in 2012. And that sort of launched me on a path of just more investigations and more books. I've got a total of 8 books now and been on various television shows and worked with a company called Small Town Monsters, making documentaries about these same sort of monsters. So it's just something I've always been into and love to pursue.
What do you think is people's fascination with cryptids?
Well, I think it's like the broader range of these topics. It's just that, kind of that wonderment, or that there are things that are still undiscovered out there, things that we just can't quite define, and sort of that thrill that you just might be the person who could find the proof or explain it, or just simply have an experience yourself. An encounter, because you kind of think about these things, you hear somebody else's story, but how would you react in that situation, good or bad? So I think it's something that innately appeals to us as humans to want to look into and solve mysteries. And, in the case of cryptids, I think it's those that kind of have an affinity for the outdoors, the woods, who go exploring in remote mountains and forests and hiking. Well, it provides that, unknown element when you're out there in the wide world.
Now you yourself, have you seen like a Sasquatch or anything like that?
Well, I've had several experiences. Some of them merely howls and something just out of view, but I have had what I think could possibly be a sighting. I'm not going to say 100% because I didn't have a really, really good look, but it was during the day, and this was only several years ago. In fact, in the Boggy Creek area, when I just saw this huge, actually a reddish colored thing move between these cypress trees in this swampy area where there's a long history of sightings. And it was some place that I've been many times and had other experiences, but this was just pure luck, really. And so, those things like that always kind of keep you on the trail, because you're like, you're just one step closer.
Now, talking about the Bishopville monster, how did you get into researching that?
Well, after I had published my book, The Beast of Boggy Creek, and that came out, I was quickly contacted by several television shows like Monsters and Mysteries in America, who did a segment, and a lot of just invitations to come speak at Bigfoot conferences. So I thought, well, this is great. I like this, and I should write another book or look into another case. So I had read many times about this case that occurred in Bishopville, South Carolina, back in the late 80s. And people had reported seeing this upright, scaly type humanoid that they called the Lizard Man. And to me, it kind of was reminiscent almost of a creature from the Black Lagoon or something. And I'm a big fan of that movie, love that kind of thing. And I thought, well, what is it people were seeing back then? Are there still sightings? So I went to Bishopville, which is a very rural area in Lee County, South Carolina. And I spoke to several witnesses and spent a lot of time in the town and mostly interacted with the retired sheriff, Liston Truesdale, who had been there when all of this stuff really took place starting in 1988 and really blew up into this whole media sensation and a lot of reports. And he had collected everything, newspaper clippings, all the police reports, photos, affidavits from the witnesses, things that you don't normally have in a cryptid case or any of these cases. I mean, most of the time the law enforcement will just try to, brush it off. But he took it seriously, not not necessarily believing or not believing that there was a quote unquote lizard man, but just that something was going on and he felt like people could even be hurt. So he pursued this in a very investigative way using his skills. And so once I got there and kind of saw the scope of this and just almost how it had just overtaken this little town of Bishopville at the time all this was going on, and all the newspaper reports and People magazine had come down there, and it was on the Good Morning America. I mean, it was just crazy. And so, I thought, well, this is great. This makes, for a great book. And so that became my second book, the Bishopville Monster.
Interesting. And in your investigations in it, were there like common things that were going on, or was it just random stuff, or how'd that work?
Well, how this really started was initially back in July 14th, 1988, the Lee County Sheriff's Office got a call from a family that lived outside of Bishopville, and it's an area called Scapore Swamp. It's kind of a wild and swampy place, of course. And they lived there, and they said their car had been, what they believed, attacked by an animal or something. It was all torn up, and they could see footprints and hair and all sorts of stuff. And so some of the deputies went out there, and they're looking at it. They're like, yeah, it definitely looks like something's been biting and clawing, and the trim was ripped off the car and all sorts of stuff. And they just thought, this is really weird. So they called the sheriff, Liston Truesdale, and he came down there to have a look. And in the process of just trying to figure out just what had happened, some of the locals kind of began to, crowd around. They see the police there, and one guy said, well, maybe it's the lizard man. And Sheriff Truesdale said, what, lizard man? What do you mean? And this young man said that people in the area had been seeing this upright humanoid type thing. It was either brownish or green, and they just called it the lizard man. And so that's kind of how, the police were clued into it. And of course, very quickly thereafter, there was a newspaper report, and that kind of brought in some more people. And then that brought in a young man who came in with his father to the police station and said that he had something that he should probably tell them because it may have to do with this whole lizard man case. And that young man's name was Christopher Davis, and he was a high school student. And he said that about 2 weeks earlier, he had been driving home after his fast food job in Bishopville, driving through Scapore Swamp, had a flat tire. So, I mean, he's out there in the middle of nowhere, so he just had to change it. And as he was just finishing up, putting the jack and the tire back in the trunk, he looks up, and in the moonlight, he could see this humanoid thing coming at him. And he first took it, as a person, which would have been scary enough out there. But as it got closer, he said he could tell this was some sort of a thing, a creature, and it walked upright on two legs. It looked brownish or green. It had reddish eyes. It had, long clawed fingernails and such. And he jumped in the car and, took off. And this thing tried to pursue him and tried to get in the car before he could get rid of it. So once he told that to the police, and then that story got in the newspaper, you can imagine that now it was just sort of a media frenzy from there.
Absolutely. And how many? I mean, how frequent are the sightings of this thing?
Well, once that story got in the newspaper,
Hmm.
then you had several other people that came forward and said they had seen basically the same thing in and around Skateboard Swamp and on the Skateboard Bridge um, in the last couple of years. But they didn't know, they saw this and just thought, well, I'm not going to tell anybody because,
Hmm.
people think you're crazy. So it wasn't until other people had reported it that the witnesses were comfortable to come forward and talk to Sheriff Truesdale. After that, then you also had more sightings. So the frequency was like every several days, and then maybe a gap of a week or something that some of the locals report seeing something, run across the road. There was a crop duster that worked in the area who said he saw some kind of bizarre thing running on two legs across his little runway that he has on his property. And I interviewed him and some of the others. So once the ball got rolling, there was people coming forward with the sightings, and as well, there was people running amok in Skateboard Swamp, trying I'm going to find the Lizard Man, and it just became a real problem for the police and the locals.
Was there ever any footprints or anything like that found?
There actually were. Shortly thereafter, when Chris Davis's story came out, the sheriff's deputies got a call kind of late one night, and a woman said she heard this just blood curdling scream or howling coming from the swamp area. So they drove down there, and that area just kind of goes off the blacktop, and it's literally dirt roads that go to some of those old houses out there. They were down there, and they came across what looked like footprints that went across the road, and they got out and looked at those, and they were these just really, really bizarre looking three-toed tracks. They were huge and definitely didn't look like any normal animal, or certainly not a human. So they ended up taking plaster casts of those, and that sort of was entered into the evidence of the Lizard Man. So there was stuff like that going on too.
That's not the only. I mean, as far as around the United States, the only story of something with three toes like that. Because you hear stories of that all the time, especially in the swampy areas. They're either three toes or it looks like they have webbed feet.
Absolutely, and that kind of jumps over to the Boggy Creek case, because in that case it was described as a Bigfoot-like creature, but the footprints that were found at the time back in the early 70s were three-toed. And you also had the Honey Island swamp monster from southern Louisiana that had been seen in the late 60s and 70s. That had three toes. And then, there's just a smattering of these bizarre three-toed, either sort of Sasquatch-like prints or more reptilian type things.
Hmm. 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 So when they were all out looking for this thing, I mean, were they taking guns with them, or were they just out looking for this thing? I mean, did they go out with the intent to kill one?
Well, many of the locals were. I mean, and that was almost a bigger concern to the police, because you had the potential of whatever this unknown thing was, a monster or whatever. And then you had people down there with shotguns heading off into the swamp, which is a dangerous place.
Hmm.
Mr. Truesdale told me some just crazy stories. I mean, he was chasing a moonshiner in there one time and fell into quicksand. So definitely a dangerous place. In swamps, you have venomous snakes and alligators and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, you had people in there, and that's probably because the local radio station put out a bounty. I think I want to say it was one Columbia radio station offered $1 million if you could bring in uh, the creature. So of course people are going to run amok,
Right.
and so yeah, and it was just people. Like I said, it was kind of dirt roads down there leading to Skateboard, and I mean, I talked to a lot of locals who said there was just cars lined up down that road, just crazy. I mean, it's just a crazy thing.
How big of an area is it? I mean, for that thing to be able to hide.
Well, Skateboard Swamp, and there's different kinds of swamps. I mean, blackwater swamps and marshes, and like the Everglades is more of a flowing river. Um, Skateboard Swamp has a swamp channel, a bayou flowing river channel, and it runs for many, many miles. And along the banks of that area, it's quite wild, or at least definitely was at the time, and offered plenty of, uh, seclusion for just about anything that wanted to live back in there. So, it just sort of passed by that area outside of Bishopville, but it was, long, and then it kind of connected to other waterways and creeks and rivers and other forested areas there in South Carolina. So, yeah, it was, plausible that something unknown could be hiding in there.
Now, when you're looking at the reports and talking to people about this stuff, are you able to kind of sort out who's telling the truth, or who might be telling the truth, and who's just stretching it just to be involved with with the stories?
Yeah, you actually could, because and I've noticed this in these kind of cases where there's this sudden flap of sightings and then there's a bunch of media coverage. Well, you have your honest witnesses who just saw something they can't explain, and you also
Right.
often attract people who don't care, have no integrity, and they want to just either add to the case or trick people, or whatever their intentions are. And in this case, Sheriff Truesdale did find one guy who claimed he had shot the lizard man. He came to the station with these fish scales. It was totally ridiculous. And all that's kind of recorded in the newspapers at the time, and in Truesdale's papers. So you could kind of eliminate those kind of jokers. But Sheriff Truesdale did, when possible, and especially the later sightings, he had those people come in and write down what they had seen. And there was a sighting that was, I think it was in 1990. So it was after that, a family of 5 was driving through there late one night, and they saw this thing jump out and run across the road. And 3 of them came in, the adults, and wrote down their statements. So you could literally read the thoughts of the witnesses right there at the time, not years later, not recollections, but what was written there. And when you read these, you can 100% guarantee they saw something they couldn't explain. I mean, it doesn't prove it's a lizard man. And some of the descriptions kind of varied, but I mean, it was quick sightings, and it's fairly dark. But yeah, these people saw something.
How tall is that thing?
It was described as being, roughly 6 to 7 feet tall. And anthropomorphic, which means, roughly human shaped. It had 2 legs, 2 arms, stood upright, tall, somewhat taller than a man. So a lot of the newspapers kind of had a tongue-in-cheek approach, and they would draw the lizard man, and it would have like an alligator snout looking thing and all kinds of kooky stuff. But that's not what people described. And only a few people even described it as having a tail. For the most part, it was this humanoid thing, almost what we think of like with like a reptilian, or even this sort of crossover with extraterrestrials or reptilians, or a race of reptoids. So very much human-like.
What do you think these things are? I mean, you got this lizard man, you got the boggy creature, you got Sasquatch. Do you think that these things were on the Earth were here long before us, or do you think that maybe some alien test gone wrong and they just put them back out here?
Well, I think any and all of those are possibilities, because ultimately we can't say for sure unless we had a body or one walked out of the woods and greeted us. But yeah, I mean, I think in the case of the reptilian type thing, definitely it's more of a jump as far as biology, that it's not some sort of half human, half lizard situation. This would be something that if this if this exists, then it either had to have been here all along. And some theories suggest that if some dinosaur species had survived and continued to evolve, and perhaps had fleed underground and survived, the cataclysmic event that wiped out the rest of the dinosaurs, that perhaps these things would end up looking much more like us as their brains grew and they stood upright. Or, extraterrestrials is certainly an explanation, although, there's not really UFO sightings to correlate with this. So, or people believe that there's possibly a shape-shifting lizard people that live among us. You don't know. I mean, was it a giant hoax? A couple of people came forward saying, I was the lizard man. I was the one that scared Chris Davis. However, they couldn't really account for all the other sightings. It's like they just forgot that they need to, if you're going to claim something, you got to explain how you were down there in the swamp for the last, 5 years or whatever. So all those, and as far as Boggy Creek Monster, where you're getting more descriptions in the nature of a Sasquatch, I think those could be pushed more into some undiscovered ape, wild man, and then across the board, a lot of people, there's theories that these kind of things are coming through portals or from other dimensions. And, again, you can't say they're not until we can prove otherwise. So it's sort of, that is the whole appeal, is like trying to figure out what this thing is and what people saw.
Right. Were you able to go and take a look around the swamps or not?
I did. And on this investigation, I went to several swamps during that investigation on what I call the swamp tour, but I was with my longtime research partner, Cindy Lee, and we were able to go out into those woods and along that channel there and go to the skateboard bridge where people had literally had sightings and look around. And again, what we found in that case, like many of the other swamps we've been to, is it's definitely a rugged place. And then just having the opportunity not only to talk to Sheriff Truesdale, but some of the witnesses. Frank Mitchell was one, he was the crop duster that had a daytime sighting. We talked to him at length. He's since passed away, so I'm glad I was able to interview these guys. Sheriff Truesdale's also passed away, so my book sort of becomes now that preserving record of all these incidents.
So what do you think this is, in your personal opinion?
Well, in my personal opinion, I think part of it is people saw something unexplained down there. And I'm not sure if it was a reptilian humanoid. I think given some of the witnesses who said they thought it had hair, it's even possible that it's a road Bigfoot, or, coming out of the swamp. It's wet, it's got algae on it, even a skin condition. It could perhaps be something like that. I think some of the witnesses, the fever of media coverage and stuff, some people would see things that not a real solid sighting. So perhaps some of those could be thrown out. But at the end of the day, like Christopher Davis and some of these other, he was even given a polygraph test and passed. So in my opinion, it's really hard to pin down one culprit for this, because it is just so bizarre.
Now, earlier when you mentioned one of the first sightings of this thing, where it looked like it seemed like it was being aggressive and coming after someone. How many reports that are out there like that, or has it been more benign? When people see it, it's off in the distance.
Most of them, were, it wasn't coming at people or being aggressive. And in the lizard man case, in that time period. You had Christopher Davis's incident, which is definitely aggressive. You had one other where it kind of lunged and tried to get in a car. You had other cars that were reported with damage. That first one I talked about, but then later there's been several other cars over the years that, I mean, were obviously, an animal or something had damaged them. But most of the sightings, brief, somebody sees it run across the road, they're standing there, they see something come out of the woods and it goes back in, which is pretty much, it can be applied to most cryptid cases. Bigfoot, I mean, you've got some of those creatures seem to be aggressive and you got stories of it attacking people, but by and large, it's usually just a very brief sighting and that's it.
Now, from the beginnings of these sightings, did the sightings peak at one point and then settle down, or are they super consistent?
They did kind of peak, like, so this was summer of 1988, and then, like I said, once the sightings started getting reported, then several locals came forward and they had seen something going back as far as 1986, so 2 years prior. And then the sightings, there wasn't a lot, but it kind of just trailed off into the around 1990. So about 2 years after that, still some sightings. And then after that, it pretty much goes quiet, and you don't get, any more reports, at least not in Bishopville. Now, I've had other reports of these same sort of lizard men or reptilian humanoids. But in that case, it just was sort of this concentrated flap of sightings and hysteria and news coverage. And then after a couple of years, either, the thing moved on, it died, whatever it was, it just stopped.
I just wonder if they migrate with the food supply.
Well, certainly. I mean, if these are biological animals, then that would be definitely the possibility. And I think reports of Bigfoot fall very much in that, because you can go up and down waterways and you'll have a pattern of sightings. And oftentimes I've got sightings from somebody who doesn't even know the other person, who kind of corroborates that perhaps these things move around a great deal. And what better way to travel than sort of along riverways or these swamp channels that are usually have some sort of tree coverage, and they go under roads with a bridge. So yeah, definitely. And like any other large mammal or predator, if you look at the range of a mountain lion or something, it's got a significant range. So I think something like this would just have to do what it has to do and go follow the food and water supplies.
Now, when we think of Sasquatch here in California, we think of further up north in the woods and how expansive those woods are, to where these things. I mean, I'm saying things because I think there's populations of them up there. I think there's a bunch of them up there. They're just able to hide because there's just so much space for them to hide in. Is that the case with this one, that there's a lot of space out there where they could hide?
Well, down here in the South, there's a lot less contiguous forestry, and that becomes a problem, because you're right. The Pacific Northwest, you just look at that and go, dude, Bigfoot can easily live out here, and does. Down here, it's a bit more scattered. So you have these swamp areas. You've got the foothills of the Appalachians that run into Georgia. You've got mountainous areas like Ouachitas in eastern Oklahoma and Arkansas. And those are usually the places that you're getting these reports. And here in the case of the lizard man, it's a swampy area. But as far as being something as vast as some of that area in the Pacific Northwest, by no means does it even compare to that. So things are a little more broken up here, and perhaps, again, why you have a pattern of sightings near waterways, because that's usually where there's the most rainfall and forestry.
Another question I was just thinking about is people that live way up in the swamps, because there are people that live up there, whether it's moonshiners or whatever's up there. have there been reports from people like that? Because, I mean, if anybody's going to see him, it's going to be somebody that's way up in the middle of nowhere.
Absolutely. And in a lot of these, you see the same patterns in these sighting cases where here in the Lizardman case, one of the guys who came forward and said, well, I didn't say anything, but I saw something, this upright creature run between some trees several years ago. Well, this guy lived right up in the swamp area. Mm-hmm. So, he's kind of in the heart of it. And in the Boggy Creek case, kind of same thing. You had a lot of the locals that lived down there on the Sulphur River and along Boggy Creek. Well, they had sightings of this long before it ever got any kind of press coverage. So it was only till like somebody somehow reported it to the newspaper, and then they would just come forward and say, well, we've been seeing this thing down here for years. We just don't run to the newspaper, which gives it some credibility, I think, because, right. It didn't just pop up out of nowhere. And also I should add that in the case of the Bishopville Lizardman, I found through my research, very coincidental or very odd, that some of the Santee Native Americans, the tribes that lived in that area, they had a particular story of this race of beings that would come from the east or come from the coast, and they would come through that area, the very area where Bishopville sits today, and they describe these things as being kind of like lizard men with these hard, long tails and things like that. And they said when the fish kind of dried up at some point, they kind of disappeared. But I mean, it's weird. I was like, hundreds of years before somebody reports the sighting of a lizard man in Bishopville, here you had Native Americans describing basically the same kind of creature.
Interesting. Very interesting. Mm-hmm. The other thing, I'm thinking about this, and I would love to go on an expedition. I mean, like, I've been up in Happy Camp where I've gone out with those guys, looking for Sasquatch. Mm-hmm. But something like this would be interesting because it is a swamp.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of gravitate towards swampy things, and kind of being from Texas and the southern kind of thing. People have asked me, how come, are you ever going to write a book about Pacific Northwest Bigfoot? I'm like, well, there's so many good books on that. My thing is, swamps and all this kind of odd and strange reports of creatures down here. So I'm often visited swamps, Honey Island Swamp, Skateboard Swamp, Mercer Bayou near Boggy Creek, Okefenokee Swamp, which is in southern Georgia. And in fact, I have a book called Sinister Swamps, and that covers a lot of the swamps around North America that have a long history of sightings, not just of cryptids, but I mean, any kind of strange and paranormal things, from ghosts and orbs and reports of cannibals and witches. Swamps just seem to have an air of strangeness, and naturally, it's a kind of place where it's not as developed. It's a place where somebody could find refuge, whether it be an animal or a person. So that, yeah, they're great areas, and I do go into those swampy things and look around myself.
Well, tell me about that. Tell me about going out. What equipment do you take? How do you do it?
Well, I'm not particularly a tech kind of guy, but I definitely, you want the basics. I mean, under any circumstances, which obviously you need survival gear. I mean, you need lights, flashlights, whatever camping supplies you need. And certainly these are dangerous places. I have, high boots, snake boots that protect me. I've walked right by cottonmouths and other things before. So you have to be mindful of just, first off, the dangers that are out there that are not even related to cryptids. And then, of course, you want gear like, you want a camera and oftentimes audio equipment that could record vocalizations that you hear would be a good one. And we've got some like FLIR thermal cameras. Those are great to be able to penetrate further into the woods, to get a heat signature from something. And then a lot of times we have used canoes to get into these places. That's really the best way to move deeper into the swamp. So myself and Cindy, or my late research partner Tom, I've written about a lot in my books, and we take those canoes back in there and just kind of paddle into where there's nobody out there, and then we'll either do that and return, or sometimes even camp on an island or something back there. And that kind of just immerses you in that, you are in the environment where, I guess, one of these creatures, could be. And certainly if you've got a lot of reports, that's the hot spot. So, it's kind of fun.
Now, being in a swamp, I'm just thinking about footprints. And is it hard to decipher footprints? Because, when we step down on the mud, it goes everywhere. So how are you able to figure out what's a legit footprint as opposed to just a.
It is challenging. For sure. And the good part about investigating places with water like swamps, it's going to give you better potential in the substrate for footprints, because hard ground is not going to leave much behind. So you do have that potential, but then again, if it's too mushy, it's going to distort the prints. And one thing I've seen over the years that more and more of these areas, especially in the South, has been just infested with feral hogs. And it's very frustrating, because we'll find a good strip of like maybe a 2-rut road, like a ATV trail or something that's, we can just walk up that and look for footprints, because if anything stepped across it in the dirt, muddy dirt, it's going to leave a footprint. But you just find where the hogs have just torn it all up. So that, that makes it even harder, because it's already hard to find the proverbial needle in a haystack, but now you've got something working against you. So a lot of times we've just been frustrated because how much has been torn up. But that doesn't, we found a print near Boggy Creek in Fouke one evening, and in fact it looked pretty much like a classic 3-toed Boggy Creek monster print. And we just found that by literally walking and looking up these kind of muddy spots where you could get a footprint. So you can find them, and you'll find alligator footprints. Those can be kind of scary when you see a really big one. So yeah, there are things out there.
What about noises at night? You're out in the middle. Do you hear? Because look at the Sierra Sound. Because they were able to get that speech on there. Do you guys hear a lot of noises out there at night?
Occasionally. On one occasion, I was in Florida in the Ocala National Forest, Skunk Ape territory, and I heard something. It literally sounds like something was hitting on a can, and that was an odd noise to hear, because it was literally no one. This was in January in the middle of the Ocala, and not really a camping season or anything. I pursued that, and I could hear something really big running, but it just stayed just out of sight. I never could catch up, and I couldn't chase it too far, because then I was really getting off into the woods, and didn't want to get lost. But that was odd. And then I found the can, like there it was. And you think, what would be hitting on a can that would make a noise, not just scratching on it. But
right.
And then in some cases, we're down in the Mercer Bayou Swamp in Arkansas, and we were in a canoe, and myself and Tom, we heard this really eerie howl. And of course we stopped and started listening, and about 45 seconds later, we hear this howl again. And the second time we heard it, we could focus in, and it was this just kind of a growl howl thing, very deep. And we heard it again. It was absolutely, could just kind of rule out a coyote. It wasn't the sound of a cougar. Foxes make weird noises. It really wasn't that. Wasn't a bird, so you just start narrowing it down, and it howled again. And it was really spooky because it wasn't too far off, but we're in the water, and this was up on where there was some land. We didn't hear it again. So we ended up, that was kind of towards the late night. And so we turned around and canoed back to where we had our tent on this high ground, which you need to camp on the high ground there because those gators, there's huge alligators all in there. You don't want to be on their level. So we pulled the canoe out and got up on that hill, and no sooner we got up there, we hear that same howl, but this time it was really close, right across the bayou channel, literally where we pulled out that canoe.
Wow.
And, I just remember like it just, you didn't expect that in the moment, and sort of the adrenaline flows, and I just grab a light and I just run pell-mell down that hill trying to see what it was. I thought, well, here's my chance, do or die. I guess I felt empowered because I figured it was on the other side of the water, but I never could quite see it. And it moved into the woods so fast. And then about 30 seconds later, it just howled from 50 or 70 yards away.
Wow.
So yeah, you hear strange stuff. And then, when you're done with all that, you just sit there and go, first off, you're like, wow, did we just hear, one of these creatures that everybody has reported here? We heard that. And then you may quite say, what the hell are we doing in here at that point?
I know going out in Happy Camp, to be out in the woods like that, you get the feeling you're being watched. And I mean, it's not, and when I felt it, it wasn't like from a bobcat or a bear. I mean, this was really strong, like when somebody's staring you down. Have you felt that way when you're out there?
Yeah, there's been times where you just feel like you're not alone. And you're right. Yeah, it's not I mean, there's all sorts of things in the woods, deers and so forth. But yeah, you just get that weird feeling. And that's the thing is, we're in their environment. If this is where they exist and live, they heard us coming a mile off. They could smell us, they could hear us, and they well know we're there. And animals, any sort of animal, is an expert at concealing themselves and surviving. So they could be just out of sight and see you, but you cannot see them.
What do you like best about it, investigating and looking for these things?
I mean, kind of two things. I like interviewing the witnesses and hearing their stories, and especially when you find somebody who has a very credible story that, by all accounts, they're not making it up, and maybe even have sort of an emotional reaction to seeing something startling like that. Often getting to know these people, because once they tell you their story, they trust you and you have some sort of a connection. So I've gotten to know people that I otherwise wouldn't know simply from them reporting a sighting of a cryptid. But I also do like, getting out there into the area and doing some investigation sort of in the field, just to also complement that there's reports here, but it is also it's a wild area that I believe could support what people are reporting.
Absolutely. Now, doing this for as long as you have you found that people are more open to this stuff now than they were years ago?
Yes, I think so. And I don't know if you find that in your investigations, but it seems like people are more willing to tell you now. And I think that's a lot due to just there's so many of these shows on TV where people see other people saying they had seen something. They're like, well, I saw something too. You don't feel like you're the only one. And so the cable television shows have proliferated that. And I think, as well as social media and, sharing information like that. So I think people are a lot more comfortable now than, say, 30 years ago, very hesitant to tell you they saw, an ape in the woods or something, you know.
How hard is it, when you go out there to track this thing or you're looking for this thing? How hard is it to even find footprints out there? How rare is it?
It's hard. I mean, and I think as a whole, even, I mean, there's a lot of big suspected Bigfoot tracks and, reptilian things, but it's not that much compared to the number of years that has passed and the number of people that have really seriously looked into this. So it's just not that easy. And, I've only, in the number of years I've been doing it, there's only been a handful of times where I saw footprints or other things where I was like, okay, I can't, I ruled out everything else. I don't know what this is, but you just, a lot of it's just luck, really. I mean, being at the right place at the right time and persevere and to know what you're looking for. I mean, you gotta, sure, hunters are like, well, I've never seen anything. Well, you're probably not looking. If you're not looking for unknown tracks, you may just walk right by them and not think anything about it. So, but I mean, with these TV shows and with the internet, it just seems like, man, people are seeing cryptids running everywhere. That's really, I don't think, the case. I mean, it just seems that way, but true sightings are few and far between, which is the only logical way this could be, because otherwise, if there was that many of them, we would more easily discover them, or one would get run over by a car or whatever.
Right. The other thought I had was this thing has 3 toes on it. Is this an elongated foot that we're talking about, or is it like a more stubby foot like an alligator would have?
In this case, these tracks were, in my opinion, quite suspect just because of the odd nature of them. I mean, it doesn't look as natural of a footprint, which, my thoughts were, I mean, again, you've got people that try to add to these things that aren't credible, and then you have to try to sort out which things are legit, which things are not. This footprint, and there's a picture in my book. I mean, I think most people will agree that it's less animal-like and biologically sound than some of the others. But that being said, like a print like the Honey Island swamp monster, that one looks a whole lot more strange and does look like a biological animal, although kind of close to an alligator track, but not an alligator track. So each case is unique, and I think the problem with footprints in general, there's not that many, and a lot of them, if the creature's not just sort of making a nice, imprint of its foot, it's stepping over sticks and rocks and its foot moves, you get these inconsistent footprints that are often hard to compare to the next one. So that creates a problem. There's few and far between, and they're not very perfect,
What about fur samples?
Well, certainly been many of those. I've seen several tufts of hair that are suspected Sasquatch hairs, and my colleagues have either found things or people have given us, and those sometimes have sent off to be tested. It's expensive to get scientific testing, and if you're trying to get DNA testing, most people don't have access to just randomly get that test. And then what we found is a lot of times the collection method of the hairs often contaminates it. So it'll be, it might come back as human DNA, even though doesn't even look like human hair, because the person's touched it. So you don't have a really good chain of custody on the evidence. Whereas, and that's because these are what my friend Shelley Covington calls citizen scientists. I mean, most of the people like us are out there looking into these cases, or just doing our best. We don't have all the scientific gear that we need. We don't have teams. We don't have budgets. So, yeah, you just don't often get the best pristine samples. But there sure has been a number of hair samples that were suspected Bigfoot that have turned up. The best guess that they could say is, well, it's not any known North American animal. It's not any great apes, and it's not human. We just don't know what it is. It looks similar to ape hair, but not apes. So you're just sort of left with the unknown still.
Now, with all this disclosure, for UAPs and all this, do you ever think we're going to have the same type of disclosure for these types of creatures?
Well, I mean, conceivably, if we could get past the UFOs, you think, that would be the number one thing that we could accomplish, and the government we're sure the government has looked into that. There's no question about that.
Right.
Not such a clear case with cryptids as to whether they've taken that seriously or not. I'm sure at some point, especially back in the 1970s when a lot of this first started, I'm sure that the government put some effort into looking into it. And there's been a lot of claims that military personnel and military groups were apprised that their superiors knew something about it. But I don't have any faith in the government whatsoever doing much of anything, filling a pothole, much less, coming out with a concise answer about UFOs or Bigfoot or ghosts,
What do you say for people who might want to do what you do and go out and look for these things? What should they do?
Well, I think that there's a number of ways. It depends on what you want to accomplish. If you want to just document sightings in your local town and interview people, that's one thing you can do. If you want to, if your goal in life is to prove the existence of some of these creatures, then obviously you may need to go into the woods. And if you're going to do that, then you do need to be wary and have some sort of knowledge about what you're doing. I mean, there's so many other dangerous things out there that don't have anything to do with the cryptids. So if you're going to plunge into the woods, definitely, go with others and be knowledgeable where you're going and have the proper supplies. We have snake bite kits, and we have the water, and we have things to start fires if it rained and everything else became wet. I mean, all the survival gear necessary if you're really going to go off the grid, which, in today's world, it's hard to get off the grid because your phone can connect to satellites pretty well. So it's a lot easier to do this stuff now than it was, even 20 years ago. But, just know your area, and you don't necessarily have to trek off to the Pacific Northwest to look for Bigfoot, because if you do a little research, you'll probably find that there's Bigfoot sightings pretty close somewhere nearby you in your state. And that's a good place to start. Reach out to other, some other cryptid groups on Facebook and say, hey, man, I want to join in. What can you guys, show me the ropes? And I find that most people are just super cool and excited, and they'll be glad to show you what they know with this stuff.
Absolutely. What's next for you?
Well, I've kind of done a range of books, and I'm trying to come up with another topic. I've been researching actually some stories in the Southwest and sightings of other creatures that gives me a little different terrain. I'm still in the South, but in the Southwest, you have a different environment. I'm going to be out of the swamp environment into the more arid desert type places, and there's some really unique reports of creatures out in those areas. So I've really been just kind of fielding a lot of those and just kind of looking at where I want to take that. Because it seems like the more things you write, the more you begin to say, well, what do I do next type of thing. So I usually just kind of, in some ways, I just let let it lead me, because in fact, I got a report today of a skinwalker which, is something that you hear in the Southwest. So I thought, well, that's cool. And here comes this random report. So it kind of fits in with some of the stuff I'm looking at. So perhaps, a Creatures of the Southwest type book will be next.
Absolutely. How can people find you?
Well, the best place to find information about me and my work is at my website, lyleblackburn.com. And that's got links to all sorts of the stuff I've done, from the books and documentaries to my music. And of course, you can also get all my books on Amazon, where you can get everything else in the world. So lyleblackburn.com, or check out Amazon.
Fantastic. Lyle, it's always fun to have you on. Thank you for coming on, and maybe down the line we'll get you on again and talk more about this stuff.
Sounds good. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right, Lyle. Have a great one.
All right.
All right, bye-bye. All right, it is always fun to have him on. I love talking about that stuff, And like I said, I had the opportunity to go with some Sasquatch investigators up in Happy Camp many, many years ago. What an experience I'll never forget. Tomorrow, we're shifting gears. Tomorrow, Karen Clark, our medium Karen Clark on our team, went to Disneyland last week. And me, I don't miss a beat. So I gave her a couple of assignments to do while she was there. And I'm not going to get I'm not going to get the mouse mad at us or anything like that, because that's not my goal. But, there's a lot of stories about the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland. People leaving ashes on there. There's a lot of stories about different ghosts around the park. And why not? I mean, if you're going to go, you end up at the happiest place on earth, right? But so I wanted to do something about that, to do a show about that. So Karen Clark's going to be with us with her experiences from Disneyland, in particular the Haunted Mansion, and she's going to share, what she felt. And I can share a little bit about when I went back in last February, or in January, February. Carrie and I, producer Carrie and I, had some experiences as well when we were there. But I just want to clarify that none of this is proven. It's paranormal stuff. It's just stories, just ghost stories. But I mean, it's not any worse than what anybody else is doing. I mean, all over TikTok they tell these stories. So I just thought we would get together tomorrow and tell them. Okay, I just don't want to upset the House of Mouse at all. But so I just want to clarify that. So tomorrow at 6:30 p.m., Karen Clark will be here, and we're going to be talking Ghosts of Disneyland. So there's something you guys might not want to miss, right? Okay, anyway, if you'd like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We're equal opportunity here at California Haunts Radio. We're just trying to get the word out about our show. Leave us a happy face, smileys, whatever, because we're just trying to, spread the word, and you guys have done really well with that, We're going into our 4th year on the air, starting in September, and we're just rolling right along. The numbers are growing, and I just appreciate each and every one of you, the people that come live here and the people that listen on the RSS feed at Spotify and different places like that. I really, really appreciate each and every one of you. All right, that being said, I'm going to show you Lyle's information, and then we're going to bug out of here, and I'll see you guys at 6:30 p.m. tomorrow Pacific to talk about Ghosts of Disneyland. So here we go. Okay, his website is lyleblackburn.com, all lowercase. And the book is Lizard Man, the Bishopville Monster. And of course, he has other books. Here's Momo Beyond Boggy Creek. I'm losing my mind. Beyond Boggy Creek. You've got The Beast of Boggy Creek, Sinister Swamps. And there's several other books, and of course, they're all available at his website and Amazon. So check those books out. He's got a lot of interesting books out. Anyway, I want to thank you all for coming, and I will see you tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Have a great rest of your evening.